Today, we're going to explore this from a different angle. What if Richard Allen didn't act alone? Maybe he met an accomplice in the woods, or was attempting to deliver the girls to someone. Or maybe someone helped him catfish the girls into going to the bridge, or even just told him that they'd be there. The prosecution told the judge that they were exploring every angle and open to possible accomplices. In fact, they tried to get the judge to keep the arrest affidavit quiet on that basis. And there really is compelling circumstantial evidence for involvement of some kind by Keegan Klein, the young man now awaiting trial on child porn and child exploitation charges, who also had catfished Libby under the pseudonym Anthony Schatz. But I have something special for you today. Better than having me make the case for Klein's involvement, I got a friend of the channel, former federal law enforcement officer Dave Jenkins, to make it. Dave has followed this case with a keen eye since early on, and his professional instinct has been that Klein is somehow involved. So what I'm about to bring you was created by Dave, special for us. Let's get to it. On February 14th, 2017, the bodies of Libby and Abby were discovered on private property adjacent to the Monon High Bridge in Delphi. The girls had been missing since the previous afternoon, after being dropped off to enjoy an afternoon at the wooded park. After crossing the dilapidated length of the 6-story Monon High Bridge over Deer Creek, Liberty demonstrated incredible intuition and courage by surreptitiously recording a man who followed them across. Evidence indicates this man brandished a pistol to control the girls. Libby's phone captured the words, "Guys, down the hill." Trapped, the girls complied and were subsequently killed. Despite being seemingly blessed with evidence and leads from day one, the investigation unexpectedly faltered, and it was nearly 6 years before Richard Allen, one of Delphi's 3,000 citizens, was arrested for the 2 murders. He may have acted alone, killing the girls to satisfy his own twisted fantasies, but the specific charges issued by the state of Indiana leave room for charging additional defendants. And the prosecuting attorney, arguing to keep the court documents sealed, told the court that he believes there are additional actors. From nearly day one, the FBI fixated on Ron Logan, the 77-year-old owner of the wooded property on which the murdered girls were found. But most people concluded the motiveless murder of 2 teenage girls by an elderly man on his own property seemed unlikely. Leaving the bodies where they were killed, unconcealed and certain to be discovered only 500 yards from his front door, was far-fetched. Logan was not charged and has since passed away, and the FBI doesn't seem much involved in Delphi these days. There was, however, another name that came up early on in the investigation: Anthony Schatz. Rich, handsome Anthony Schatz, with whom Libby was completely smitten. Her phone was recovered by searchers, and there may have been messaging on that phone known only to law enforcement, who have released very little information on what they recovered. Libby's friends, however, let authorities know she'd been communicating with Schatz, was completely infatuated with him, and may have made plans to meet him on the day she was murdered. Knowing this, one of the friends messaged Schatz the day the girls' bodies were found. She asked if he'd heard about Libby. After being informed of her death, he replied that he was supposed to meet her, but she never showed up. The owner of the Schatz account was quickly identified as Keegan Klein of Peru, Indiana, about 40 minutes from Delphi. In his early 20s, Klein looked nothing like the handsome young Anthony Schatz. Nor did Klein live in a mansion, travel extensively, work in the music industry, or own exotic sports cars. Instead, Klein was an unemployed high school dropout who lived with his father, smoked a lot of weed, and trolled the internet for unsuspecting underage girls. The handsome lad decorating the Schatz profile? A model whose pictures Klein stole for his own use. Despite their fixation on Ron Logan, the FBI nevertheless dispatched one of their own to interview Klein and to execute a search warrant for the Klein residence. Keegan told the agent that he and his father had been vacationing in Las Vegas at the time of the murders. That was a lie. They left for Vegas sometime after the 20th, over a week after the murders. But the agent, a highly trained member of the finest law enforcement agency in the world, crossed him off the list. He never even checked the alibi. Meanwhile, this emerged. On February 20th, 7 days after the murders in Delphi, a teenage girl got off a school bus near Peru, Indiana, and found a ski-masked man looking in through her bedroom window. Terrified, the girl told her parents. The police were called. A report was made. The girl admitted the day before she'd given her home address to a young man she'd met online and planned to meet after school, Anthony Schatz. So 2 roads were leading to Anthony Schatz right as Keegan and Tony Klein were heading to Vegas. One road in Delphi, where police were learning about Libby's relationship with him. The other in Peru, where the masked intruder had showed up at an underage girl's bedroom window. The police investigation quickly grew to include multiple agencies investigating child sexual abuse materials, or CSAM. It became, or is said to have become, the largest CSAM investigation in Indiana history. The Schatz account was soon traced to Keegan Klein. Klein was using Schatz to catfish underage girls. He manipulated them into sending him inappropriate images and video. He'd been surprisingly successful collecting hundreds of images and videos. The Kleins returned from Vegas on February 25th and were raided by law enforcement. Electronic devices were seized. These devices were found to contain a great many CSAM pictures and videos. Keegan was taken in for questioning. He admitted he had a problem. When questioned about the Delphi murders, he denied involvement. He agreed to take a polygraph. When asked if he knew anything about what happened to the girls, he said no. The polygrapher told Klein that this result seemed to show deception. Despite the abundance of CSAM in his possession, he was released. On returning home, he retrieved his primary phone, which law enforcement somehow failed to locate before. He then deleted Snapchat and Instagram. Then he searched, how long does DNA last? He also deleted all media history from the 10th to the 15th. Why only those dates? What was so crucial, so incriminating that he couldn't leave that data to be found? He didn't even delete the CSAM materials he had on that phone, but he deleted that data, those 5 days. Why? A couple days later, he surrendered the phone to the police. Keegan Klein spent the next 3 years doing not much of anything. He moved to Las Vegas for a few months. His Facebook account tried to portray him as living quite the life there. He claimed to work as a bounty hunter, armed security. He had a medical marijuana delivery business. He was a casino card dealer. He tried to start a new life, it seemed, with Delphi far behind, but it didn't work out, and it wasn't long before he was back in Peru, staying with his mom, his dad, or whatever friend would have him, until, that is, August 2020. Then he was arrested and finally charged with the 30 felonies related to possession of child pornography, obstruction of justice, and child exploitation. After this arrest, he was interrogated by the state police. Last spring, the transcript of this interrogation leaked. Having studied the material found on his phone 3 years earlier, the police had reached some shocking conclusions. They believed he knew what had happened to Abby and Libby. More shocking, they seemed to suspect his father, Tony. Now, I want to pause here to recap and ask a couple of questions. Just a reminder, this episode has been scripted by Dave Jenkins. Dave recently visited Delphi with his son, and they drew some unexpected conclusions. Hopefully, I'll be able to get him on camera to talk about this and show us the footage that they took. He's a little reluctant to put his face on the screen because of undercover work that he did while in law enforcement, but he's a great guy, and he has all the instincts and analytical tools he developed during his career. So I'm hoping at some point you guys get to meet him. Okay, so Abby and Libby were killed on the 13th. Their bodies were discovered on the 14th. On the 20th, in nearby Peru, an underage young woman got off the school bus to find a masked man peering into her bedroom window. She went to the police and admitted to having arranged to meet a boy she met online, Anthony Schatz. Shortly after the 20th, Keegan and his father left for Vegas for a brief vacation. Meanwhile, 40 miles away in Delphi, police were also looking into Anthony Schatz, who Libby's friends said had been communicating with her. Also, police had Libby's phone, so they no doubt checked her social media communications and found more links to Schatz. In fact, if police were telling the truth during their interrogation of Klein, Anthony Schatz communicated with Libby the morning of her death. The Schatz account was traced to Keegan Klein. The Kleins returned from Vegas on February 25th. The police were waiting with a search warrant. They grabbed his electronic devices and found a ton of CSAM. For some reason, No charges were made against Klein at that time, and then he moved back to Vegas for a period. Eventually he returned, but it took 3 years for police to finally arrest him. Why? We're told that Klein became the center of a huge CSAM investigation, suggesting the existence of a group of predators working together. But have there been any arrests related to this? What is the actual evidence of the existence of this CSAM investigation? The notion of a huge pedophile ring plays large in the public mind now, the largest CSAM investigation in the state's history. You see it repeated on Reddit a lot and in other podcasts. But what is this based on? All I could find was a statement made by police while interrogating Klein. They said the following to him: "Bud, from your Dropbox account, off your phone, we started one of the largest child pornography investigations ever undertaken in the state of Indiana." So does everything about this claim about the largest investigation stem from that one statement during an interrogation? If there haven't been any arrests, I have to question it. What is the actual evidence that's been made public, or at least hinted at by officials, that anyone else had access to Klein's Dropbox filled with CSAM material? If the only evidence of this massive investigation is that interrogation statement, I can't help wondering if the police conflated two distinct investigations when they said that to Keegan. The investigation into the Delphi murders is no doubt the largest investigation in the state's history. Then they conflated this with the investigation into Klein's CSAM case. The reason it's so important is because claims of a massive investigation into Klein's Dropbox is used to imply that there's a network of people sharing the material. This network could be a link to Richard Allen. However, I haven't yet seen any evidence that anyone else had access to Keegan's Dropbox. I have a Dropbox. It has all my old crappy screenplays and half-finished novels in it. No one else has access. No one else would want access. So the question here is whether Keegan shared his Dropbox with anyone. Well, have there been any arrests? Let's get back to Dave laying out the case. To start with, Keegan Klein is an absolute predator who is cultivating and manipulating underage girls into sending him images and video. He also had horrific video on his devices, probably obtained somewhere on the dark web, depicting graphic sexual acts with very young girls. Enjoying these kind of violent videos portrays Klein as someone who utterly lacks any feeling for the suffering of others. So this guy is a monster in the making for sure. He's said to be one of the last to communicate with Libby before her murder. Libby's friends say she planned to meet Anthony Schatz. When one of them contacted Schatz shortly after the girls went missing, Schatz replied that he was supposed to meet them, but she didn't show up. Money had been sent from the Schatz account to Libby, presumably for some kind of photos. A week after the murders came the incident with the masked man outside the window. While on his trip to Vegas with his father, Keegan searched for a lot of weird stuff, including about the Sandy Hook murders, where little kids were slaughtered in Connecticut. He looked for photos of that. He also searched whether you can trace an IP address from social media. He searched for how long DNA evidence lasts. Keep in mind, this is only a couple of weeks after the murders and before he was arrested. So it suggests at the very least that he knew he'd been communicating with a girl that was just murdered. There's evidence he failed his polygraph, specifically on the question of whether he knew anything about the murders. After his initial arrest and release, he went home, took out his primary phone, which he managed to hide from the police, and deleted the Snapchat and Instagram apps. He also deleted all media from the 10th to the 15th. The murders were on the 13th, right in the middle. When he was initially taken in for questioning on his first return from Vegas, he said he was, quote, fucked. He'd taken an extra bag with him to Vegas and planned to slip away while his dad was sleeping. He initially said he was the only one with access to the Dropbox and to the Schatz account, but later suggested there might be others. I have to interject here for a moment that this change on his part doesn't necessarily impress me as meaningful. His reason for then suggesting others might have had access was an attempt to create some plausible deniability about the most offensive videos on his devices, and there were some really bad ones. You can see this during the interrogation when police talk about some of those horrible videos. He wants to distance himself from those, pretending to be shocked by them. Okay, back to Dave. According to the podcast, The Murder Sheet, which cites a source said to be close to the investigation, Klein searched for the location of the Delphi Marathon gas station on the day of the murders. Again, I want to pause. I myself found this claim by murder sheet to be dubious. There's absolutely no mention by police in their interrogation of Klein of this search, and there absolutely would be. They talk about all his other suspicious searches, so they would use evidence of such a search to amp up the pressure on Klein, but there's no mention of it by the police. Okay, in December 2021, the police asked the public for help. They wanted to talk to anyone who had interacted with Anthony Schatz. And it was at this time that it leaked that Keegan Klein, now in jail on CSAM charges, was the one who was behind the Schatz account. Reporter Barbara McDonald got Klein to give her a jailhouse interview. During this interview, Klein admitted his father, Tony, might have had access to the Schatz account. He conceded his father was physically capable of murder, though he claimed he and his father had spent the day of the murders together. But he seemed to be trying to cast suspicion in his father's direction. During their interrogation of Keegan, police suggested Tony Klein shared access to the account and to some of Keegan's electronic devices. They also told Keegan that in 2020, Tony Klein slammed the face of a child, his stepson, into a toilet, punishment for clogging it. This broke the boy's orbital socket. So Keegan's father has a very unsavory reputation. This past summer, Keegan began cooperating with investigators. What this cooperation involves has not been made public. In September, they spent 5 weeks searching the Wabash River near Klein's residence, a search that involved massive amounts of police resources. That search ended on September 26th, and on October 27th, Richard Allen was arrested. Coincidence? Law enforcement claims they came across Allen's file while re-examining early leads and tips. Dave doesn't believe that's the whole story. His instincts as a former investigator are that the seeming coincidence of these events is just too hard to accept. There must be a connection. I have a great respect for those instincts, and I know that many of you guys out there share his conclusions. I myself lean towards Allen being a lone killer and the girls being just random victims, but my mind is split. I certainly respect the other view of this, and I won't be shocked if there is ultimately a connection. Again, I want to thank Dave for putting this together. He recently traveled to Delphi with his son Dylan, who's smarter than both of us. So between the two of them, they actually came up with some insights that surprised them. And they have some great footage, and we want to get that to you guys very soon. So the dilemma here is this. On the one hand, there seems to be no evidence the girls told anyone they were going to the bridge. On the other hand, it's one hell of a coincidence for the Kleins not to be connected to the case. Keegan had catfished Libby, possibly communicating with her in the hours before she was killed. His actions after the murder suggest someone trying to hide things. There's evidence his father was aware of his catfishing and possibly participated. Meanwhile, the case against Richard Allen is very tight, and there's no known connection between the Kleins and Richard Allen. Was there a pedophile group operating in Indiana that Klein played a central role in? Could that be the connection? I myself am not convinced because I've seen no evidence for it, heard of no arrests. But let's finish with a couple of questions. What would it mean if Richard Allen acted alone and Libby and Abby were just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Conversely, what would it mean if he did have accomplices? If the girls were just random victims and they weren't targeted, then we have to really accept a deep lesson on how we look at evidence in these cases. There can be a lot of revelations that make us go, aha, that's the killer, but where it doesn't mean that at all. I saw a lot of this in the Lizzie Borden case. There's some evidence, though circumstantial, that really points a finger at her. But then you have to confront the fact that no murder weapon was found in that small house, despite multiple rigorous searches. And this forces you to go back and look at some of the circumstantial evidence that at first seemed powerful, but on really close inspection might not hold up. Same here. For example, police told Keegan that he was one of the last to communicate with Libby that day. He claimed not to remember it. That could be a lie, but it could be the truth. Keegan, under the guise of Anthony Schatz, would blast out daily messages to the group of underage girls on his friend list. So when police say Keegan messaged Libby that day, was that all they meant? That he sent out a group message? It wouldn't technically be a lie by the cops, but it's not exactly the same as communicating a personal message. If police do have specific messaging between Libby and Schatz that day, why not confront Keegan with those specifics during their interrogation? Whenever police are being vague, it's usually indicative that they're trying to build something on a flimsier piece of truth. But what if the Kleins were involved with the murders? It's absolutely critical to know, not only to bring justice, but because learning how these kinds of predators connect and work together will be important to solve other cases and to prevent some of these crimes from happening in the first place. Thanks for joining us. If you think we've earned it, please click subscribe. If you'd like to help us in our war against the algorithm, ring the bell. In the next video in this series, we'll bring you footage from Delphi, some of which reveals something very important about the case, which we hadn't realized until Dave and his son went there. Okay, take care.